Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough for me right now. Let's get into the interview. Before we get into the podcast, I'd like to give a big shout out and thanks to Zoho, and particularly the team at Zoho Desk, for sponsoring the podcast this month. Zoho Desk is trusted by over 50,000 businesses around the world to elevate their customer service. And the team over there recently asked me to write a white paper for them that explores how focusing on employee happiness and customer success can drive business results. The white paper is called The Killer Combination: Customer Success, Happiness, and the Right Technology. Now do check it out by following the links in the show notes, because I think you're really going to like it. So, shall we get into the interview? So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Liza Smyth, who is the SVP of Customer Experience at Formstack. Hi, Liza. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing, Adrian?
I'm very well. Can I just say, it's a long time since I had an Irish brogue on the podcast, and I am loving it.
Well, I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So, Liza, for the benefit of our listeners who are not familiar with yourself and maybe the work that kind of Formstack do, can you tell me a little bit about you and also the work that you do?
Sure, yeah. So a little bit about me. I'm born and raised in Ireland, relocated to the US about 8 years ago. I am a mom to three fabulous little kiddos. I have Ollie, who is 8. I have Max, who is 7, and Ruby, who is 3.5. And they certainly keep me busy and entertained. The work that I do, yes, I lead customer experience. So what does that mean? I'm a customer journey mapping practitioner, so I look at the end-to-end experience, how we feel about it internally, but also the outside-in perspective. Sometimes we make assumptions on how our customers feel. We look at metrics, etc. It's really important to engage with our customers to get their perspective on their wants, needs, and are we delivering to those. And so that's something that's really important to me. With regard to what Formstack does, we are a no-code, low-code solution. We increase productivity by streamlining processes within organizations, whether that be through docs, through forms, through signature, e-signature, etc. And so we look to make repetitive tasks easy and automate them, so that ultimately, I would say, when you hire an individual, you're hiring somebody with a skill set, somebody who brings something to the table. And when you put upon them repetitive tasks, and people will say how much time they spend on repetitive tasks each week, you're doing them a disservice, quite honestly, because they could be spending their time really focusing on something which is more customer oriented. So that's what Formstack does.
Awesome. Now, the reason I wanted to get you on the podcast, invite you on the podcast, as it were, is that because we were talking about, in the setting up of this, we're talking about how, employee experience and customer experience efforts in organizations are often handled separately and are categorized into sort of like internal issues and external issues.
And that's one of the things I wanted to kind of like dig into, because I know this is something that is very close to your heart about fusing the things together. But before we talk about the fusing, let's talk about kind of the separation, kind of where things kind of generally are. So why do you think they're treated separately, categorized kind of differently in organizations?
Hmm. So I think it could happen for a few different reasons. I think it's recognition of the importance of it. And if you don't recognize the importance, then you will detangle the two. Also, depending on who feels it's their responsibility to drive those two things. Sometimes in some organizations, what I witness is it's the talent team or the HR team who feel it's their responsibility to drive employee engagement through benefits and all of those things that we offer. And then the customer experience teams, the support teams, et cetera, they're focused on, well, I'm focused externally on the customer. And so I think this is where you need to bring the two things together, because as leaders, we need to think about how we develop our employees, et cetera. But if different parts of the organization feel that they're accountable and it's their remit, then the two don't often come together. So I think that's what I've witnessed, at least some companies, in the approach that they take.
Right. Because I also got to know that, sort of digging into that sort of, not the fusing of it, I know that you firmly believe that you need to prioritize and foster sort of a positive employee experience, particularly when you're dealing with those people that are dealing with customer issues, kind of like hour by hour, day by day. There are, those ones that are at the center of helping customers. And if you do so, your CX efforts fall into place. I mean, and the thing that occurs to me, something I've talked about, because it's the distinction between, and it's almost the gap that's getting filled in, as it were. It's like a lot of time people talk about employee experience, they talk about to the things you were talking about, like, the benefits and the time off and the performance reviews and all these different sort of things. And then you talk about the customer experience, and that's kind of like touch points and this bits and pieces like that. The thing that gets missing is the employee or the agent's kind of like role in helping the customer achieve the things that they want to achieve in the moment, as it were. And I call it this kind of achieving, operational excellence in the moment. And it's that sort of agent experience. And that's a bit that sort of gets missed in many kind of parts. But I know that that's kind of right at the very heart of what you do. And it's also an approach that you've fostered and developed kind of over time. I mean, you were at Apple, and then you were at LinkedIn, and now you're at Formstack. So can you tell me about your philosophy, how that all started, and how it sort of developed over time? Because, I think that'd just be super interesting and really useful for people that would be listening in.
Yeah, sure. So going back to my time at Apple, and so my role was actually in sales leadership, which is, you kind of go, oh, customer experience, how did you get there? You were in sales leadership. And Apple made a decision a long time ago with the sales teams to remove commission and give a customer experience bonus instead.
Okay.
And so I had to implement a strategy around how we would evolve to that destination once decisions made and we roll it out. And you're talking to people who are sales hungry, where the commission is really, really important. And so how do you get people to focus on just the customer in the moment? And so it's like building out a whole program around recognition, around training, around investment in their career, other things that would matter to them, so that they wouldn't attrit out of the business. We didn't want them to leave. And so, it's particularly in sales, and I think that commission and sales hunger is required at a certain level and tier of a customer.
Yeah.
And so there is a point where maybe when it's smaller businesses, when it's like professionals, et cetera, where, if you focus on the customer and what they want to accomplish and forget it, and you could put out of your mind that this is the commission check, the customer feels more engaged. They feel like you actually care about me in a moment. Yes, the results would see that your average handle times would increase slightly, but also your conversion rates would probably increase. Your average order values would increase, but because I'm having a conversation with you about what makes you successful. And so, oh, by the way, you may need this cable as well. And do you want to get this machine custom? Because based on what you're telling me, I think this is what you're going to accomplish out of it. And so you're forced into a situation where you have to think about the employee at that point in time, because you've just removed a commission check for them. And you kind of think about the program you need to put in place. So that was really, really helpful for me as a kind of baseline. And thereafter, all my roles with other companies have been in customer experience because I had done it in the past. And I think that role at Apple helped me understand more about the customer, their wants and their needs. And then throughout the course of my time with LinkedIn, very often I got a team, like I started, when it just commenced in Ireland. It was they had just set up their international headquarters there. So everything I was doing throughout my tenure there was tend to be starting with smaller teams and building them and shaping them. So I could start small. I could think through what was the experience. I could test and I could iterate. The last team actually was the team that was already a large team in place that I took on. And this is where I really recognized the importance of addressing the ENPS as well as the customer NPS. And ENPS has become a much bigger deal in companies now. People have a rhythm around it, a rigor. What's really important to do is, yes, I get the results. Now, what are you going to do with it?
Right.
And visibility to your employees that here are the themes. Let's talk about them. Let's validate that. Like, what did you mean by this feedback? And now, what are the things that we're going to do about it? You need to realize you can't address 60 different things. You need to distill it down into the biggest priorities and go after those. And we do that all the time when it comes to customer journey mapping. You can't figure out the whole thing in one go. Mm-hmm. So prioritize the heat map and what the challenges are and go after those and prioritize them. To make both things line up with both the employee experience and the customer experience.
So I'm really interested in the idea, and based on what you said, it's like because we know that kind of like companies are in danger of serving their customers to death, mm-hmm. And hopefully they don't kind of start pouring the same sort of treatment on their employees, as it were, but because ENPS is a thing, but surveys are, yes, an interesting and useful mechanism for keeping a tap on what's kind of going on. But like in any kind of survey sort of process, it's all about closing the loop, about kind of like the listening and gathering and analyzing, and then kind of closing the loop, and then communicating back, and then kind of like rinse and repeat sort of thing. I guess I'm interested in that sort of process because that's, for many organizations, that's the hard kind of bit. It's easy to go out and go, ba-ba, and then you're like going, it's not bad, kind of sort of thing, carry on sort of thing. But actually the hard work, I think, is actually spotting the little things and then kind of like almost like grinding through and making those little things kind of better. So can you talk to me a little bit about the actioning of that sort of thing, getting that sort of thing, because that's like a behavior, I think, that you probably have had to develop, because it's not one and done, as it were.
Yes, very much so. Closing the loop is how it just resonates so well with me. Both from I'm a consumer. If I provide feedback, what are you going to do with that feedback? Does anything ever change? Is it consistently the same? Or, where you can take it to another level is you could come back to me and say, you provided some feedback. Would love to either talk to you further or let me tell you what we did with the feedback that you provided. Mm-hmm. So closing the loop with our customers is really, really important. And equally so, if not even more so, with your employees. And so ENPS, you need to make sure it's not just an event that slips away there afterwards. So if you're going to take it with the utmost of importance, you do the survey. The richness of so first of all, encouraging participation. When you see that participation is low, it's a signal that they're disengaged. Mm-hmm. So encouraging participation, and that can happen over time because they will only participate if they actually see that you start to take action. So that needs to be something that's over time. But encouraging participation, scheduling the time for them to participate so that they know it's important. You're all in a team meeting somewhere, you say, let's block off 10 minutes now, take your time to complete your survey. Please, that feedback is so important to us. And if you're willing to do so, those free text fields are really important, because it's one thing looking at metrics. It's another thing when their voice can be heard and you can actually see what they mean by some of those metrics. There afterwards, the survey closes and we get the results. Go back to the team and say, these are our results, ours.
Yeah.
We all own it.
Yeah.
We all play a role in this.
I like the language of that.
So let's talk it through. Would love to create an open dialogue where we can talk about examples where if you say this score looks like this, examples where that shows up. What would you like to see differently? Is there a stop, start, continue that we can do as an organization, et cetera, et cetera? Okay, so now that we've had that dialogue, if I'm hearing correctly, here's the 2 or 3 main themes that we should be focusing on. Okay, so now let's keep the conversation alive on those 2 or 3 main themes. So depending on your level in the organization, you're like, okay, in my weekly meeting, we're going to be giving an update on these things and the progress that we're making. We all own it, so let's create some tiger teams around it. Who wants to participate in those? Because we own it together. And then everyone feels like they're in the flow of owning it.
Right.
Then it's reporting out on, okay, so here's the things that we've made progress on, that we've done, that we've implemented, et cetera. Now, when I go back to do ENPS, has the needle moved? So, because you always want, how am I going to measure the success of this? And so, are you seeing things going in the right direction within the scores? Is the free text fields, is the sentiment changing at all? Is the dialogue changing? Are we starting to see some compliments coming through? And so, those are the types of things just to keep it alive.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we do, like, it's a check mark. We did it. It's great. And we can move on. And that is actually, you're better off, if that's the approach you're going to take, don't do the survey.
No, well, exactly.
You'll frustrate the employees. They're like, what's the point in giving the feedback if you're going to do nothing about it?
Can I add, the other thing is that's probably crucial in there, I'm guessing, I'm not guessing, I sort of know, is that the speed of response post survey. I know in many organizations, they'll push it out, they'll gather it all, and they'll go like, fine. And then they'll kind of like sit on it. And then they'll look at it and then wonder, stroke their chin sort of thing. And just kind of wonder, what should we do? But actually, I think it's really interesting what you said is that you've done the survey, gather the results. Here's our results. I really like that language. This is our results, not your results. This is our results. Because I think that minimizing or accelerating that speed of response and then speeding up the time to action and things is crucial, because it's a bit like you're saying, is like, I gave you some feedback and then I never hear back from you, or you send me a thing because 6 months later you go like, you said this and we did that, and I'm like going, I have no idea what I told you. And I think that's the sort of thing. It's quite a human thing, right? It's you want to have a conversation with somebody, but it's facilitated through a sort of it's instigated through a survey. Then you have to show that you're, like, I feel like the speed of response shows how important, or the importance you put on it, I guess.
The other thing with those surveys is sometimes why people don't take it or won't sometimes put the free text fields in is for fear of retaliation.
Yeah.
And so do I feel I can say my piece without the fear of negative consequences towards me? And so the facilitation of those conversations there afterwards needs to be with a particular tone that encourages, let's talk this through. Can you say more about that? Could we talk about some examples? Could you talk about what you'd like to see differently? And that's going to come down to the relationship the leader has with their team. That relationship is so important. And it's not, and this is very much, so this is Liza speak, but like, I can't just get to know you from the job you do. I need to get to know you. What matters to you? What you care about? The names of your kids? Do you have a dog at home? What's going on for you right now? And so if you actually have established and spent time establishing that type of relationship with your team, you will encourage them to continue to speak up. And honestly, then if you do that right, before you even get to your EMPS results, you should already know, because there's an ongoing dialogue. Like I would rather somebody share with me in a moment, as opposed to just seeing something surface in an EMPS and being shocked about it. That for me is a reflection. If I see that, that's a reflection on me. And so I want to keep the dialogue going on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
And that is a craft you need to develop.
Yeah.
By establishing those relationships with your team.
And so how is your approach sort of, you started with Apple, and then it's gone to LinkedIn, and now gone to sort of like Formstack. How is that? I mean, what sort of like, so this is all about performance improvement and experience improvement and outcome development and things. I mean, what are some of the kind of, you talk about, you've got to tie it back to metrics and things. How have we kind of like, have we seen it? What sort of like outcomes and outputs have we seen as through this sort of approach, but really zooming in on this and focusing on it, and then just kind of driving through kind of improvements over time?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll give an example with a team that I worked with prior to Formstack, where the employee engagement scores were in the 60%, and the customer satisfaction scores were below 4 out of 5. And within 18 months, with this type of strategy, you deliver an employee engagement score of 86, and your CSAT scores evolving to 4.5 to 4.8 out of 5. So there you see the correlation of the two things coming together.
Sure.
And so what's interesting about Formstack for me is this is the first company I've ever started with that was fully remote. And I'm a social kind of person. I love like getting into meeting rooms. I love whiteboarding and all that sort of stuff. And whilst at LinkedIn, the last couple of years had been remote, you'd already established those relationships. And so, you could carry on because you already knew people. When you're brand new to a company and you're starting remote and everything is over Zoom, you have to take a different strategy. So every single meeting for me starts with the first 10 or 15 minutes. How are you doing? Catching up? What you do over the weekend? What's happening here? Where are you if for somebody new, where are you located? Did you grow up there? Do you have family around you? And it's just around getting to know somebody, because it's amazing what I can learn in those first 10 or 15 minutes that can change the direction of the rest of the conversation and provide me with an insight that is helpful. They will share something about, things they did in the past. And I'm like, that's interesting, because I feel like we could associate you with that project in the future. And so whilst I genuinely get a kick out of just getting to know people, it's amazing how it informs me on things that help the business as well. And I think people want to feel seen. They want to feel like they matter. And so skip levels, really important.
Yeah.
And so access. Knowing that they have access to you, don't wait for me to schedule something. Like, I'm available on Slack, or we can jump on a Zoom, or, and so access is really important, and humanizing those relationships. With regard to metrics, again, coming into a company like Formstack, I've got an ability to shape metrics. On things maybe that we haven't looked at in the past, and the correlation between metrics. So if SLAs are telling me this, what is that telling me on customer satisfaction? If I see customers canceling, what is the commentary that's coming through? How can I get to the root cause of some of these types of things now that I'm starting to measure the business in an appropriate way? And so every single week, as part of our readout, we have all of our CSAT comments, and each person in the leadership team reads all of them.
Right.
And so it's like, oh, that's interesting. Now I'm starting to see a trend come through here. 4 or 5 of these customers said something similar to us. Can we go into those cases and see actually what happened there? And then we start to identify, is this a training need? Is there something getting stuck with the customer? Do we get back to them within the time frame that they anticipated? So we start to get to the root cause of some of these things. But it'll always start for me with the commentary from the customer on, like, this is actually what happened, and this is where things went wrong or went well, etc.
Mm. And I think the thing that you kind of talked about before, and it kind of made me think about, you talked about this idea about people feeling, I don't know, the word safe, or kind of like they feel that they kind of they can be open and honest and transparent about how they feel about stuff, particularly when you're sending out surveys. And I also kind of know, and so that I think that sort of links to, because I know that you're a big champion for diversity, inclusion, and equity and belonging and things, and you're the exec sponsor of the DEIB Council at Formstack. And I wanted to understand, but how do you fold that into your EX and CX kind of efforts? Because I think that openness and belonging, and inclusion and stuff is essential. I wish we didn't have to really talk about it. I wish it was just done, if you know what I mean. But the fact that we have to kind of pay attention to it and really focus on it and make sure it gets done, it highlights just how much of a gap or an issue that it really is. So it'd be really interested to hear about how you fold that in to get that kind of balance as well.
Sure. Sure. And so to frame it into like, how did it become so important to me? Growing up in Ireland in the 80s, predominantly, white Irish Catholic country. And my first experience with dealing with other cultures was actually in Apple. And I got a rude awakening, because I'd been in telecoms. I'd only really ever managed Irish employees supporting Irish customers.
Right.
And I start with Apple, and there's like 17 cultures and 17 markets. And I was ill prepared for that.
Mm-hmm.
And, in those early stages, undoubtedly made several mistakes. And then really piquing an interest in me and getting to know people from other cultures, and that curiosity. And then with LinkedIn, I think Dublin probably houses like 54 languages for LinkedIn. And so it's become this hub. And then Ireland has changed dramatically over the years.
Yeah.
And then getting married to somebody from West Africa, and my kids are mixed, and I come to the United States, and I think I understand some things, but then I don't understand the history of African Americans. And then all of the other nuances that come with it. Mm-hmm. But my kids are going to essentially grow up as African Americans with a mother or father who don't actually understand what that means, or at least have never walked in those shoes.
Sure.
So the importance of actually having to learn and educate myself and lean in and
Mm-hmm.
be an ally to communities that are underrepresented became of huge importance to me. And I got great opportunities at LinkedIn to lean into those efforts and really learn. And so one of the criteria that I had set out for myself in moving to Formstack, or actually what I was seeking where my next play would be, is that DEIB would matter. Mm-hmm. I didn't care where you were on the journey, because every company is a little different by way of maturity. I just needed to know that it mattered, because then I would lean in and I would support. Mm-hmm. And then got a great opportunity to be the exec sponsor. So it matters in several different ways. Now, if I'm thinking about just economics, research shows that diverse companies perform to a higher degree. It's got creativity and solutioning, different perspectives. The other side of that is, when you have diversity within your company, you can also represent your customers better, because your customers are diverse.
Really? Crumbs. So it's like,
and so it's like representation matters.
Exactly.
Now, it matters but it's what you do with the representation, which is why the B came into the conversation around belonging.
Yeah.
Because you can hire me, you could invite me to the table for the conversation. I can give my perspective, but if I don't feel like I belong here, like I can actually be my authentic self, then I won't stay.
Yeah.
Which is why attrition of diverse employees continues to remain high. I also need to see diversity in levels of leadership, because I need to feel like somebody where I aspire to be, somebody looks like me in the organization. And so investment in that becomes really, really important. So this is where the two then come together, because I need all of my employees, or my goal is for all of the teams to feel like they can be their authentic selves, and that's okay. And I'm good enough, and I'm included, and my perspective is appreciated. I will stay at the company longer. I will progress my career at the company, and my company, as research shows, will perform to a higher degree.
Sure.
This is why the two matter so much.
Yeah.
And why if companies, and a lot of companies are on the train now, we see it, it's the last number of years have shifted the dialogue again. I feel like people are finding their voices finally. There's a lot of attention on this. And so you need to set about what are the goals that you're going to put in place. It's one thing to say it matters, but what are you doing about it? And what are your pillars or strategies as to what you're doing about it?
Yeah, I mean, I remember actually, so in the book I was telling you about, the kind of the latest book I wrote, the Punk XL one, and so the book is not broken into chapters, it's broken into tracks a la the album theme. And there's one of the tracks, and to your point, exactly, one of the tracks in there is called Diversity Matters. But it was riffing on a piece of research that came out from some research institute that showed that the majority of people can say, yes, it matters. But actually, when you survey them about what they're doing about it, that number sort of falls away in terms of what they're doing about it. And when asked why, they were like going, oh, they don't have the time, or there are other things take priority and everything else. And when you drill down even further, a lot of it's to do with the sort of leadership, the typical traditional kind of leadership people, like generally the kind of it's generally kind of white cisgender kind of males that are in those kind of positions of authority. That yes, they say that they believe in it and it matters, but are not doing very much about it because they're prioritizing other things. And I squarely point the finger at them and actually at myself, being a white cisgender kind of male, and said, look, you've got to get off your arse and do something. It's kind of with you. It's not just not good enough to say it matters. You actually have to do something, because people are waiting. And if you don't do something about it, you just get replaced, because it does matter. And then, as you say, there's a train, and it becomes this thing that contributes to how attractive you are as a company, both from an employee perspective, but also from a customer perspective, and how that impacts your kind of performance and things. And so, fair play to you for what you're doing. I think that's kind of super cool, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to fold this in, because it's like, too often can people talk about this customer experience, employee experience and stuff. I mean, I think I remember talking to you when we were setting up this call. I remember almost snorting my coffee out of my nose. And when I read kind of like, I think it was the beginning of last year or something. And Forrester, bless him, kind of announced that 2021 was going to be the year of inclusive CX. And I was like, I nearly scoffed. I was like going, so does that mean it wasn't before?
Yeah. So there's advice that I would give to somebody who wants to get on the train, because there's also a level of anxiety sometimes if people are like, senior in my career, I don't really know much about this. So I'm not going to admit that publicly.
Sure.
It's like, get on the train no matter where you're starting. And so And the two pieces of advice I would give is self-educate.
Mm-hmm.
Don't put it on someone else to educate you.
Can I
Self-educate.
stop you there and ask you what you mean by that? Because I've heard that before. And can you tell me what you mean by self-educate? I mean,
Yeah.
does that just mean like read, talk to people, watch videos, kind of, or all of the above? Or
A little bit of all of the above, but the reason why it's so important is that if you are a URM, underrepresented minority, those communities very often feel the burden of trying to educate others, and it's exhausting for them. It's exhausting.
Oh, crumbs.
So,
My wife tells me, I have a conversation with my wife about this kind of like frequently. And she's saying like going, look, I'm not the one that's acting this way. You're the one that is like, it's not my problem. It's your problem. You're the one that kind of has to figure out kind of what's a better kind of way. It's like going, don't put it on me. This is up to yourselves. So I think your point around re-educating and kind of don't give the burden to somebody else. It's not their problem.
And so there'll be podcasts that you can lean into. There can be TED Talks you can watch. There's conferences you can go to. There's books that are out there. White Privilege, the 1619 Project, et cetera, et cetera. Go and spend some time self-educating. I am very fortunate that I have a community also that I can go to out of curiosity. And I've established relationships with people where I'm able to, with curiosity, have conversations. And also for me, with my children, it's like I'll probably need to get them a mentor in the future because they will go through things that I don't understand.
Sure.
And so it's really important for me to establish a community. And so that's self-education. The other thing I would say is know what it means to be an ally.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember doing some interviews in a previous company around, are you an ally? Do you know what that means? And for the most part, people were like, I wouldn't know what that means. And so it's one thing to say, yeah, I know this matters. But if you actually truly want to be an ally, that's advocating for, speaking up, leaning in, demonstrating support. It takes action. And so you can sit there quietly on the sidelines, but that is not being an ally. You cannot label yourself an ally unless you take action.
Mm-hmm.
And so for people who are, I would take the path of self-education and then recognize the opportunity to be the ally. The education is going to be important first.
Yeah. But I think that the idea is that I think you're absolutely right. That some people will be thinking about this and going, they might be senior in their career and they don't know where to start and they're scared of like making a mistake. And I would say, you don't need to you're not 100% overnight sort of thing. It's just about starting. Start something. It's all a journey. It's a journey towards just a better place and respect and trust and conversation and openness and all of those good things. But you just have to start. Because as you say, it's not good enough just to say you care about it. It's actually about kind of what you do about it is the important thing.
Absolutely.
But then bringing all this back to the kind of the EX and CX sort of stuff, what sort of advice would you kind of give to leaders who are thinking about what they should be doing to merge their employee experience to CX, customer experience kind of efforts to kind of drive those kind of better kind of outcomes? I mean, where should they kind of like start, do you think?
Sure. So from an internal perspective, in kind of merging those efforts, it's like, what do you have a council? Have you set up employee resource groups? What are your statements that you're putting out there publicly around what you stand for as a company? When you're thinking about your branding as a company, what representation do you have by way of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? Do you publicly show the ERGs that you have represented? And then what statements or how do you want to recognize certain holidays throughout the year, publicly and internally? Because our diverse employees like to see that there's some sort of a public effort. And so for the first time, and again, Formstack is a smaller organization, about 350 employees. We are setting up our first employee resource groups. It's really exciting. The first one is being established called Stack Hers. It's for females of the organization. because Stack, obviously, and Stackhurst. So, and many more to come next year as we start to kind of embed those out. And so us having those represented on our site, I think is going to be really important for what our customers see about us as an organization. And so visibility is important, because when you say nothing, it sometimes appears like it doesn't matter. And so I think this is where you can drive that home to your customers, that this notion of diversity really matters. So, and then the other things that you again, what lots of companies are doing now and doing really, really well, supporting Black-owned businesses, et cetera, and kind of making those types of investments, I think, are really important. It depends on the business that you're in, but your demonstration of support of those types of things, I think, brings a level of satisfaction internally as well as externally to your clients.
Awesome. So Lisa, before I ask you, I want to ask you just a couple of kind of general kind of questions, and then a fun one at the end. Is there anything else that would that you'd like to add or highlight that we've kind of missed out before I ask you some to zoom out a little bit?
I would say the world of remote. So the world has changed. I feel like every morning I wake up, the world is changing. But the world of remote work, and so Formstack was a remote company before remote became a thing, right? So they actually had some things figured out well in advance. And so, but we have invited people into our homes like never before, and into our personal lives like never before. And so take that as an opportunity in getting to know people. Sometimes there's all sorts of chaos going on behind us. I've, had meetings and all hands and all sorts of, conversations with, Max turning up in a Spider-Man costume, or Ruby wanting to sit on my knee and have a chat with everybody. And so you get to, it levels the playing field, because everybody's got these scenarios they're dealing with in all layers of the organization. And so see that as an opportunity to improve and establish relationships, as opposed to a challenge that we're dealing with. And there are still challenges with it, but I think for me, it has allowed me to get to know people even on a stronger basis.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do think it highlights the one thing that I noticed is that when we first moved to a lockdown around the world at the onset of the pandemic, many people that were in managerial, supervisory sort of leadership roles were told to look after the people and look after your customers, look after your suppliers. And what really showed up is that there was a question around, well, who's looking after the people that's supposed to be doing the looking after? And that you start to see the strains in those kind of supervisory management leadership sort of levels. And I think what it highlighted for me was that we had a model of leadership that operated in a face-to-face sort of traditional sort of space. And then it moved to fully remote for many people, or particularly for those that could work remotely. And now we're moving back, and then it had to adapt. Now we're moving back to this potentially either remote, fully remote, or hybrid. And there's all sorts of questions about what does that mean for leadership. And I don't think people have really sort of figured that out yet. And they've got to figure out their rhythm, the tempo, the capabilities, and the skills. And that's a big kind of I think it's a big gap. And it's something I wish that more and more companies would pay attention to, because kind of more of the same, or trying to replicate what was an in-office type of style to a remote or hybrid style just may not cut it.
Yeah. Macroeconomics right now, it's hard to know trends versus is it something that's happening in macroeconomics, et cetera. But I think there's a sentiment that's out there is it's easier to leave a job when it's a remote job, because that connection isn't there, which is why I say take the opportunity, because it's a unique one that's been presented to you, because you're now in people's homes, right? And so people feel like, well, I haven't had the opportunity to really make that connection with people, so it just makes it easier for me to leave and move on and all sorts of other things. But you know, let's say we have some headwinds ahead of us, with all sorts of uncertainty. How do you continue to stay ahead of the customer experience? So I think that, and going back to what Formstack can do for customers, it's like it's a low code, no code. We increase productivity, we can streamline processes. You hire talented people, let's get them focused on the things that they've been hired for as opposed to the repetition.
Sure.
So finding ways to automate, finding ways for self-serve, finding ways for doing things at scale, so that because the need for soft skills hasn't gone away. Our customers, et cetera, they still want that level of interaction. They just want it to be meaningful. And so, so focus the efforts on helping your employees spend time on the customer and not the process that they have to follow behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And that's, one of the other pillars that I had determined for myself in the choice of next company for me was around a product or service that mattered, that I was proud of. And when you're making a difference for an employee base, both on I'm spending far too much time doing repetitive tasks and I don't enjoy it, and from a company productivity perspective, when you can drive engagement there and we can drive some employee satisfaction for our customers. Yeah, that's a product that I'm going to be proud of to be aligned with. So, and I think that you're just going to see increasing needs in that direction with uncertainty on macroeconomics, so that we can help all of our customers essentially.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. So, Liza, before we go, let's kind of flip it from kind of serious to fun, sort of. And I want to kind of ask you kind of a couple of questions, and it's about the punk books that I kind of wrote, which I sort of explained can be beforehand. And so I've been saying to people, I have a fancy word for a fancy description. I call it my longitudinal social research.
Wow, I'm going to take that one.
It makes it sound really fancy, and quite smart, but it's really just word association. That's all it is. So so the first question is, what one word would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience or employee experience? Let's fuse the two things together. What would it be? One or two words?
You're extending the challenge here now. So you said the word challenge. I would go back with the word challenge. And what I mean by that is knowing that your employees can challenge when something doesn't feel right. So we put processes in place. We, go step by step, but sometimes that doesn't feel right. And you're like, I'm seeing the customer at the end of this. And so our policies or our process doesn't really feel appropriate for what's happening with this customer. And so the notion and your employees feeling empowered to challenge when something doesn't feel right, I think puts a lot of energy into what they do if they know that they can go there. And the other word I would use, and it does not fit well with punk, or maybe it does, but I'm just like, I feel like I want to have like these like resonating words, but
that's fine.
I'm going to say the word beautiful, insofar as treat your employees beautifully and treat your customers beautifully.
Oh, I love it. So I can tell you, because I've actually got 165 of them. I can tell you that challenging is on the list, but challenge isn't. Could make an argument to split them out. But I know
challenging can also mean that it's happening to me. Challenge is like I can challenge something. So that's the difference I would potentially find.
No, that's kind of like, thank you for advocating for your kind of first entry. And I think that I would accept that. And I think that's because the nuance is different, right? It's a challenge and then you can find something challenging and that's kind of fine. So I think there's two. And then the second one, beautiful, is not in it. So you are 2 for 2.
Yes, there you go. There you go. I made the cut.
Excellent. So we're now up to 167, which is brilliant. And the thing I can do with all this sort of stuff, because I show it to people and it's like PowerPoint suicide. Or PowerPoint hell, really, because you put up a list of 160 kind of like different words on a screen, and people go, what? And they're like, the point is, it's a broad church. That's the thing. Punk has always been a broad church, and then this is my experiment as well to try and kind of get people to think about it. And it's like because you get people to look at it from all sorts of different kind of ways, and it's fascinating what kind of comes out of people's kind of minds and imaginations. And so that's kind of brilliant. The second question I wanted to ask is this idea that actually experience is becoming this bigger kind of game. It's a multi-dimensional sort of thing, customer and employee and, stakeholder and so on and so forth. And then there's this thing called, I think, experience leadership that we need to start really thinking about. It's about who's raising the bar, who's thinking about this in a big enough, connected enough, integrated, holistic enough sort of like way. So what sort of company or brand do you think is an experienced leader and why?
I have a few. So I'll give you 4. And this is from a customer's lens.
Okay.
Amazon,
mm-hmm.
Sonos, Sutter Health, United Airlines.
So what was the third one? Health?
Sutter Health.
Sutter Health.
Yeah. And as a consumer, as a customer, like I'm an Amazon queen, right? Literally, during pandemic, you didn't go anywhere. You didn't leave the house. It was order online. I was driving down the road one day and there was 3 Amazon trucks in a row. And somebody said to me, oh, they're obviously out for Lisa's delivery. They make it easy. It's intuitive. They're presenting other items to me that actually, so it's very cleverly done. You can pretty much find anything on Amazon. But when I need help, they're like that.
Mm-hmm.
So like they make it so intuitive and easy, but I can get in contact with somebody when I need to. And I think that there's good stuff that goes on there.
Yeah.
Sonos, I experienced their chatbot, which I thought was off the charts because chatbots can be really difficult to master. And it was, however they did it was really, really interesting. And they kept me the whole way and I knew it was digital touch. And so I thought that was impressive and I love their products. Sutter Health and United were 2 that delivered a wow experience to me. The Sutter Health one was, I had to go in for a very small procedure. The prep work, all of the information in advance, etc. You get there, they've got an absolute rigor. They treat you beautifully in the moment. I got home and 2 days later, I got a card, handwritten card signed by anybody who supported me on that day. And there was about 8 people and said, thank you for the privilege of allowing us to take care of you. Blew my mind. And so I like in really, and so I talk about creating defining moments for your customers. And defining moments can happen throughout your life, but you can create them also. Mm-hmm. And so that for me was a defining moment on, wow, I didn't anticipate that. And here we go. I'm talking about it to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that small gesture that they made, I'm talking about it publicly with other people on something very small they did. But for me, it was a defining moment.
Awesome. And United
Airlines, this one, I was for sure going to miss my connecting flight. And I'd come from Denver, or I'd come from Oklahoma into Denver, hours of delays. It was a snowstorm. I was going to miss my flight. I was like, and they'd moved the gate to 30 gates away. I got off one flight at 10 minutes before the other one was departing. I was like, am I even going to bother running through the airport? As I describe it in my 6-inch heels was not a way to go in the snow. But anyway, and I was just like, why bother? It's already gone. And so anyway, I get to the door and there's a text from United to say, breathe, we're holding the flight for you.
Oh, nice.
So had I ever experienced that from it? No. And I find that they're finding more and more ways to delight you in a moment, because they know that you have all levels of anxiety. This is your only flight that you're potentially going to get home that night. We all know what that feels like. Being stuck in an airport and you breathe. Now, I was already out of breath, but it, again, another defining moment for me where I'm like, I'm a loyal customer. We're good. I'm a loyal customer now. And they're continuing to find ways to delight.
Awesome. That's great. Love those stories. And one final thing, because we can all agree the last kind of couple of years have been a bit weird and challenging. And they continue to be weird and challenging. And I find myself waking up in the morning, kind of grabbing a cup of coffee and sort of doom scrolling kind of through the headlines sometimes and going, I'm not looking at that, not looking at that, not looking at that. So what I've been doing at the end of these conversations for the last kind of few months is saying to people, let's finish on a positive note. And so can you tell me what's the most interesting, positive, or exciting thing that you've seen in the last week?
So I had a conversation with a volunteer organization that I'm considering being a board member on. And so what they do is they have a program for underprivileged youth local to my area. And it's a 7 or 8 year program that they put them through in preparation for these individuals going to college. Mm-hmm. If they go to college, they will be the first in their families and generations to have ever gone to college. So it's a big deal. And so the 8 year program, I think it starts when they maybe are 7 or 8 years of age. There's summer camps, there's educational sessions. As they get older, they prep them for college applications. There's socials. They create a community with their families and their parents, etc. And so this 8 year program that then may hopefully lead to their ability to go to college, which has never been accomplished in their generations. Mm-hmm. And so I love that sense of giving back to the community, but also going back to the topic of DEIB. If we want to truly solve things in the future by way of representation and leadership, it actually has to start at a very early age to support these communities to be successful long term. Yep. So I just get very, very excited about the program that's in place and my potential to be able to lean into that. So that, and then my kids carving pumpkins on Friday was the other highlight for me. All of their pumpkin carving, it was so weird, was so representational of their personality. Ollie, who has the biggest smile in the world, literally his pumpkin has a huge smile. And then Max, who's like my more creative and artistic and, has some emotions that he needs to manage sometimes. He had all sorts of creative carvings on. And so that was actually just fun to see. So
awesome. Well, Liza, thank you for sharing those stories kind of with me. And thank you for sharing some time with me on the podcast and for sharing, giving us the benefit of your insight and your experience, and also congratulations on the work that you do. So thank you. That's been awesome.
Yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you. And I am now going to get those books, Punk CX and Punk XL. I feel like there's going to be some rich nuggets in there for me.
Oh, thank you.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.